Okay, so this is going to be a commentary on sort of the basic techniques you want to know when trialing for leech attacker. I'm not going to be covering advanced stuff in this video. More just talking about stuff like reserves and when you want to be spec'ing and stuff like that. Reserves are the monsters that only spawn after you've killed a certain number of fighters and rangers. So I'll kind of be talking about that at the beginning of each wave, what you want to be focusing on for each wave. And then another thing you want to know is that you use halberd for controlled, aggressive, and defensive specs, while you only use bulwark for accurate specs. One other thing, it's good to know that if you spec at 36, 42, 48 exactly on a 6-second interval, the ranger will not be able to move when it spawns, which will kind of help you in getting cleaner waves. So it's good to do that if possible. You also see me use the scrawled note and the shrink potion to do something called forcing, but I'm not going to talk about that too much as it's not required in trials, but that's just in case you're curious. Okay, so running up here, there's 2 reserves of each mob, so I'm going to tag the first ranger and then spec the first fighter. And then I'm going to alternate fighter, ranger, fighter, ranger. I don't want to waste any attacks just kind of sitting here, so I'm going to alternate and keep my DPS up. Then I'm going to spec the last fighter and dark bow the ranger. Wave 2 is very similar to Wave 1, except there is only 1 ranger reserve and there are 3 fighter reserves. So you want to do the same thing, but kind of focus a bit more on the fighters and make sure they die on time. So I'm going to tag this fighter here. I want to kill these 2 fighters to make sure they die quickly. And now I'm going to spec this fighter because this fighter didn't die. Okay, now my spawn is late on the fighters, so I'm going to save my dark bow until the very end here. Then I'm going to tag this and then dark bow it. Wave 3 has a focus on rangers because there are 3 ranger reserves and no fighter reserves. So you want to make sure the rangers die and then only tag the fighters if they are going east or if the rangers are all dead. So we're about to kill our second ranger here. Tag this because it's going east. 1 more ranger. Okay, now we're all set up for our spawns. And we're going to use our bow specs here. And then dark bow the last mob. Again, I'm forcing here with the note, but it's not required. Wave 4 is very similar to Wave 3, except there is 1 more fighter reserve. So there's 3 rangers and 1 fighter. So I'm going to look to kill 1 ranger, or 1 fighter if possible. So kind of alternate here at the start. And now we're going to focus on killing rangers. Okay, we have 2 rangers down and 1 fighter. So our spawns are looking good here. And then we're going to guess an arrow here at 30 seconds. And now we're going to spec here at 36. Now this halberd is good if you can do it. But you can also just use your bow specs, that's also fine. And then clean up with bow. Okay, Wave 5 is kind of the opposite of Wave 4 in that you're focusing fighters. There's 3 fighter reserves and only 1 ranger. So you want to be killing fighters primarily and only tagging rangers if you kind of get a chance. So I need to kill these fighters here. 1 down. Okay, 2 down. and one more. This fighter needs to die or my spawns are going to be late. Okay, it died. Now we can kind of tag and clean up with our specs. So I'm just going to do bow specs here to kind of show a simpler example. Obviously, in this situation, it would be ideal to use halberd spec, but I realize it's not the most, like the easiest thing to get used to. So as you can see, it's a bit slower using just bow, but it can still be relatively decent. Wave 6 is the first wave with the AC block, so we're going to get into position here while tagging the monsters. Ideally you want to kill one ranger and one fighter if possible on the first call, while also kind of tagging the rangers in between. So one ranger down, so we'd like to kill this fighter if possible. Tag the ranger here. And we're looking good. So now we want to guess the arrow at 30 seconds. And then get ready to spec here. Spec again. And then spec one more time. And now we just clean up with the bow. So you saw me do something there after I spec'd the first time with the halberd. I kind of used halberd and then I swapped to my bow and then swapped back to halberd. That's kind of helpful because it keeps you on cycle to spec every 6 seconds. It's not necessary, but it's good to get used to when you're learning. But you can also just do halberd, halberd, halberd if that works for you better. So we're going to tag a ranger here. Wave 7 is a focus on fighters. You want to kill 2 fighters if possible, and only 1 ranger, while tagging the rangers in between. Tag the ranger again. We've killed enough fighters here, so now I'm going to guess the arrow again at 30 seconds. And now we spec. So I'll show you an example here just using the halberd 3 times in a row. It's not as effective, but it still gets the job done in most cases. And now we just clean up with the bow. Kind of alternating our hits back and forth, because we don't want to just be standing still when the mobs die. That's one mistake that I see a lot of new players make, is that they'll just target the same mob and just, you know, waste a couple seconds after it dies instead of like switching between mobs. So you always want your player to be like continuously attacking. Wave 8 is fairly simple. There's 3 ranger reserves and no fighter reserves. So you want to be mainly killing the rangers on the first call. And you can, for the most part, ignore the fighters unless they start going east. So keep tagging here. This fighter's going east, so I'm going to tag it. Okay, 1 ranger down. And then we're going to guess the arrows. And we're going to spec. Now again, I'm going to swap to my bow and then back to my halberd to keep me on cycle. And then I'll do it one more time here. And now we just clean up. See, a lot of the monsters died because I tagged the rangers the second that they spawned, and they didn't get a chance to move. Now I did see a monster go east here, so I'm going to make sure I clean that up. Okay, there's 2 fighters here. So I kind of alternate between them until I see that they die. Again, you don't want to just attack one monster and then, you know, when it dies, you're wasting time just sitting there. You want to alternate between them. Wave 9 is for new players. I recommend that you spec at 42 seconds rather than 36. So I'll kind of show an example of that. Also, if possible, you want to kill one fighter in the first call. It's not strictly necessary, but it does help get your spawns out on time. Tag a ranger here. We're going to tag the fresh ranger again. And then we're going to guess the arrow at 30 seconds. And now we're looking good. So we're just gonna kind of tag mobs until 42 seconds, and then we're gonna spec. Okay, now I'm gonna do 3 specs here. Okay, no, I didn't do that correctly. There was just one fighter there, so I kind of wasted a halberd spec there. So it's nice to kind of get used to right-clicking the stack and see how many mobs are on the stack. Just to make sure that you don't waste, like, a halberd spec when you could have killed something with your bow. It's not the end of the world, but obviously it's nicer to not be wasting time like that. I'm gonna get this fighter low, and then I'm gonna dark bow it to finish it off. Again, I'm forcing with the note here, but this isn't required for trial. Okay, wave 10 is a bit different in that you're standing in a different spot. You're standing one tile below the rangers rather than one tile east of them. So as I get into position here, I'm going to tag this fighter, tag the ranger, and then tag the new ranger. And then I want to try to kill one fighter here if possible. Okay, that fighter's dead, so our spawns are going to be somewhat decent here. Guess the arrow. And now we spec. On wave 10 I recommend spec'ing at 36 seconds if possible. Because it'll help get more eggs out for the collectors so they can shoot the cannon. Now we just clean up with the bow, and we'll go shoot the cannon. Well, assuming there was any eggs here. I'm not going to go into detail on the on forcing the omega egg. But the basic idea is that you want to well, I'll talk about it in a second here. So for this to spawn, you want to click a prayer as soon as this platform lowers, and then as soon as it's fully raised, you click anywhere to cancel the interface. Now for this part, I'm going to use my shrink potion as soon as the collector starts bending over. So as soon as I see him bend, I'm going to click the shrink, and then just force until the wave ends, and then it ends. Alright, so I hope that was helpful and kind of some of the basic strategies for attacker. There's a lot more I could go into, but it's kind of tough to cover everything in a commentary kind of while I'm playing, all in the span of like 12 minutes. But that should be enough to get the gist of it and get you started on some basic strategies that you need to learn. If you have any questions about anything, feel free to leave a comment or PM me on Discord, and I'll be happy to help you out.